It was a crisp evening and the city was bustling with life. People hurried to their destinations, their footsteps echoing against the sidewalks, the sounds of traffic filling the air. Among them was a young woman who had just finished another long day at the office. The sky had darkened, and the city's lights had come to life, casting a golden glow over the streets. Her heels clicked on the pavement as she made her way toward the parking lot, her mind still racing with thoughts of the projects she had yet to finish and the meetings she had to prepare for the next day. She had always been the type of person who carried the weight of her ambitions with her. There was a constant pressure to succeed, to prove herself in a world where success felt like it was always just out of reach. Despite her determination, there were days when it all felt like too much. Tonight was one of those nights. The fatigue weighed heavily on her shoulders as she approached her car, parked at the far end of the lot away from the busy entrance. As she fumbled for her keys, a sudden noise caught her attention. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, the sound of footsteps echoing from behind her. She glanced over her shoulder and saw 3 figures emerging from the shadows, their faces obscured by the dim light. Her heart rate quickened as she instinctively clutched her purse tighter, her body tense with anxiety. The men walked with purpose, their strides purposeful and unhurried. They were too close for comfort. A chill ran down her spine as the first man stepped forward, blocking her path. He had a rough, intimidating look, his eyes dark and unwelcoming. She tried to take a step back, but the second man was already behind her, cutting off any escape. Panic surged within her, and she looked around, hoping for someone, anyone, to notice what was happening. But the lot was empty, and the streetlights did little to illuminate the area. Her breath came faster, the weight of the situation sinking in. She was alone, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of these strangers. "Hey, beautiful," the first man said with a sneer, his voice low and mocking. "I think you dropped something." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale alcohol. The other 2 men laughed, their eyes gleaming with mischief. She forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "There had to be a way out of this. I'm not interested," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She tried to push past the first man, but he grabbed her arm, his grip tight and unyielding. Panic surged within her chest as she struggled to free herself, but he was stronger than she expected. The second man moved closer, and she could see the glint of something shiny in his hand, something sharp. Her heart raced as she realized the situation was growing more dangerous by the second. She needed to think, needed to find a way to escape. Just as she felt the pressure of fear closing in on her, she heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, the roar of an expensive vehicle cutting through the tension of the moment. Without warning, a sleek black car appeared at the edge of the parking lot, its headlights blinding in the dark. The men turned their attention toward the vehicle, momentarily distracted. She seized the opportunity, pulling away from the first man's grasp and taking a few hurried steps toward the car. She didn't know who it was, but right now she didn't care. She just needed help. The car came to a stop right in front of her, and the passenger side door swung open. A deep voice called out from inside, smooth and authoritative. "Get in the car." Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up at the driver, a man whose face was partially obscured by the darkness of the car's interior. There was something about him, his commanding presence, the confidence in his voice, that made her hesitate for only a moment. She didn't know who he was, but she felt an undeniable sense of safety in that brief interaction. Without a second thought, she scrambled into the car, slamming the door behind her. The car sped off almost immediately, leaving the 3 men standing in the parking lot, staring after them in confusion. She didn't dare look back. Her body still shaking from the encounter, she took a few deep breaths, trying to calm herself as she glanced at the man beside her. He was sitting with perfect posture, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the faint rustling of the wind outside. The man didn't glance at her, didn't offer any kind of comfort or reassurance. It was as if he had done this countless times before and he knew exactly what to do. She wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or uneasy. She had been saved, yes, but she didn't know anything about the person who had done it. After a long, tense silence, she finally gathered the courage to speak. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The man's response was short and clipped. "It doesn't matter." He didn't even look at her when he spoke, his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. "You're safe now." She frowned, the confusion growing. Safe, but from what? Who were they? Her mind raced with questions, but she couldn't make sense of any of it. What had just happened? Why had this man saved her? He didn't answer immediately, and for a few moments she wondered if he would say anything at all. Finally, his voice broke through the silence again. "I've been watching you." She blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean, watching me?" "I've been aware of the situation. You're in more danger than you realize." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a business deal, not the fact that her life had just been in danger. She stared at him in disbelief. "Danger? From who? What are you talking about?" But the man didn't elaborate further. He simply kept driving, his eyes focused on the road as if this conversation was no more than a passing detail in his day. She didn't know if she should push for more answers or let it go. Part of her wanted to demand an explanation, but another part of her felt strangely comforted by his calm demeanor. Whoever he was, he had saved her life, and for now that was enough. As the car sped through the city, she tried to calm her racing thoughts. The night had taken an unexpected turn, and she had no idea what was coming next. The car glided smoothly through the city, its sleek body cutting through the streets with ease. The woman sat back, her hands still gripping the seat as if she could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her. She was trying to make sense of what had just happened, but the more she thought about it, the more questions piled up in her mind. Who was this man? Why had he been watching her? And what exactly did he mean when he said she was in danger? She glanced at him, still trying to read his face, but there was nothing there. He was focused on the road, his eyes sharp, his expression unreadable. He had a presence about him, a calmness that was both reassuring and unsettling at the same time. She couldn't quite figure him out. He didn't seem like the type of person who would make small talk, so she decided to wait for him to speak first. For a few minutes, the only sound was the hum of the car and the occasional rush of wind against the windows. She felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, but her mind was still racing. She was grateful, yes, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this than just a random act of kindness. Finally, the man spoke. His voice was low and steady, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "You're probably wondering why I did what I did," he said, his tone almost as if he were reading her thoughts. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I don't have a lot of time to explain everything," he continued, his eyes still fixed on the road. "But you need to understand that you're in more danger than you think. The people who were after you tonight, they're just the beginning." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, just the beginning?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at her for the first time since the encounter began. His eyes were intense, calculating, as if weighing how much to reveal. "There's a lot happening behind the scenes that you don't know about," he said. "People who want to control things. And you, whether you realize it or not, are a part of that. You've been targeted, but this goes beyond just your personal safety." She felt a chill run down her spine. "Targeted? By who?" she asked, trying to make sense of his words. "What do you mean I'm a part of this? I'm just a regular person." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "You're not just a regular person. You've gotten involved in something much bigger than you realize. It's been happening for a while now, and you've been unknowingly dragged into it. The people who were after you tonight, they were just a small part of it." The silence in the car grew heavy as the weight of his words sank in. She had no idea what he was talking about. She was just an ordinary woman, working in an office, trying to make her way in the world. She had no idea that there were people out there who were watching her, who saw her as some kind of pawn in a larger game. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would anyone want to target me? I don't have anything that matters to anyone." The man's lips twitched, almost as if he were about to smile, but it was a cold expression. "You have more than you think. Your job, your connections, your potential, it's all part of a larger plan, and people like you, people who are ambitious, who have power or the ability to get it, become targets. They use you, they manipulate you, and when you're no longer useful, they discard you. But you've been lucky so far. I've been keeping an eye on you to make sure nothing happens." She stared at him, trying to wrap her mind around what he was saying. He wasn't just talking about her, he was talking about a system, a web of power and control that she had no idea existed. Her mind raced with questions, but she couldn't bring herself to ask them. She sat back in the seat, feeling both overwhelmed and oddly safe at the same time. She had been saved tonight, but she wasn't sure from what or who. What did this man know about her life? About her job? How could he have been watching her without her knowing? "What's going to happen now?" she asked after a long pause. Her voice was steady, but inside she was in turmoil. She had been pulled into something she didn't understand, and now she didn't know how to get out of it. The man's eyes flicked to her for a moment, his expression still unreadable. "Now you stay close. I'll keep you safe for as long as it takes. But you need to trust me. There's no going back from here. Once you know what's really going on, there's no turning away." She nodded, though she wasn't sure if she fully understood what he meant. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't even know your name." He didn't answer right away. The car continued to glide through the city streets, the lights flashing by in a blur. After a few moments, he spoke again, his tone measured and calm. "You'll learn to trust me in time. For now, all you need to know is that you're not alone. I've got you." They didn't speak again for a while, the weight of the situation hanging between them. She felt a mixture of emotions, fear, confusion, and a strange sense of security that she couldn't quite explain. The man beside her was a mystery, yet somehow, she knew he was the only one who could protect her from whatever was coming. As the car turned onto a quieter street, the city's noise faded into the background, replaced by the hum of the engine and the soft click of the turn signals. She couldn't help but glance at him again. He was still focused on the road, his jaw set, his expression unreadable. But there was something about him that commanded respect. He wasn't just another person. He was someone who had control, who knew things that she didn't. The car pulled up to a building she didn't recognize. It was an upscale apartment complex, the kind of place she had only seen in magazines or the occasional business article. The building stood tall against the night sky, its windows dark and quiet. The man turned off the engine and looked at her, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "This is where you'll stay for now," he said. "It's secure. You'll be safe here until we figure out the next move." She nodded, still processing everything he had told her. As she stepped out of the car, she realized that her life had just taken a drastic turn. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever was coming next. But one thing was certain: she wasn't going to face it alone. The following days blurred together, each one feeling like a repeat of the last, yet subtly different. The apartment was quiet, far removed from the bustling city she had known. It was a world away, and as she spent more time there, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her situation. It was like stepping into a new reality, one where nothing seemed familiar, and the only constant was the man who had brought her here. She spent most of her time in the spacious apartment, wandering from room to room trying to make sense of everything. It was luxurious, with sleek furniture and tall windows that offered a panoramic view of the city below. It was the kind of place that felt out of reach for someone like her, someone who had always worked hard but had never seen the kind of wealth that seemed to surround the man who had rescued her. He was always there, quietly observing her, never too far away, yet never offering much in the way of conversation. She couldn't figure him out. One moment he was calm and distant, the next, he was speaking in a way that hinted at a deeper understanding of the world, one that she couldn't even begin to comprehend. One morning, after another restless night of trying to come to terms with everything that had happened, she found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. The silence was overwhelming, but it was a silence she had come to know all too well in the past few days. The man had been distant, he hadn't spoken much, and she hadn't pressed him for answers. But today, something felt different. She needed to know more. She needed to understand why she was here, why he had saved her, and what she had gotten herself into. As she took another sip of her coffee, she heard the soft click of the door opening. She turned and saw him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable as always. "Good morning," she said, her voice sounding softer than she intended. She didn't expect him to respond, but to her surprise he nodded. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low but firm. "We can't stay here forever." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What's going to happen now?" He stepped into the room, his gaze briefly meeting hers before he looked away as if struggling with something. "The situation is more complicated than I let on. There are people out there who are looking for you, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Her stomach tightened. "But I don't understand. Who are these people? What do they want from me?" The man hesitated for a moment before answering. "They want control, power. You're caught in the middle of something much bigger than you realize." She blinked, her mind racing. "But I don't have power. I'm just a regular person." I don't even know why they would target me." He sat down across from her, his eyes locking onto hers. "You may not realize it, but you're in a position of influence. Your work, the connections you've made, they've put you on a path that makes you valuable to certain people. People who are willing to do anything to get what they want." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She couldn't quite grasp what he was saying. How could she, a junior executive at a company, be involved in something like this? She had always focused on her work, doing her best to climb the corporate ladder, but she had never imagined that she could be part of some larger, dangerous game. "You're telling me that I'm involved in something I don't even know about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What kind of game is this? What do they want from me?" "They want access," he said, his tone unyielding. "Access to information, access to people. You're a key piece in a puzzle, whether you realize it or not. And once they have what they want, they won't hesitate to use whatever means necessary to get it." She swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words. She had always prided herself on her independence, on being able to navigate the world on her own terms. But now it felt like the ground beneath her was shifting, and she had no idea how to find solid footing. "I don't know if I can be part of this," she said quietly, her voice full of uncertainty. "I don't know what you're asking me to do." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I'm not asking you to do anything, but you need to understand that you have a choice. You can walk away, try to return to your life and hope that you're not caught in the crossfire. But the people who are after you won't let you go that easily. You'll be a target for the rest of your life." The weight of his words settled over her like a cloud. She couldn't deny the truth in what he was saying. If she walked away, she would be running for the rest of her life, never knowing when the next threat would come. But staying meant being involved in something that she didn't fully understand. A world of power, manipulation, and danger. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to be a part of this." The man's expression softened just for a moment. "You don't have to be a part of it, but you need to know that whatever you choose, I'll be here to help you. You don't have to face this alone." The sincerity in his words struck her, and for the first time since she had met him, she felt a sense of comfort. He wasn't asking for anything from her. He wasn't trying to pull her deeper into his world. He was offering her a way out if she wanted it, but the question remained, could she really walk away from this? Could she go back to her old life, pretending like everything was normal when she knew that people were out there watching her, waiting for her to slip up? "I don't know if I can leave," she said finally, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can go back to my old life." He nodded as if he had expected this. "Then you stay, but you do so knowing that you're part of something much bigger. There's no turning back, but I promise you this, you won't have to face it alone." She sat in silence, her thoughts swirling. She didn't know what to do, but something deep inside her told her that there was no going back now. She was in this whether she understood it or not. Later that day, he took her to meet someone. A man with a reputation for knowing the ins and outs of the business world. A man who seemed to have all the answers. He was older, grizzled, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When they sat down across from him, he wasted no time getting to the point. "You're in deeper than you think," he said, his voice gruff. "And if you want to survive, you need to start thinking like them. Not like the person you were before." His words hit her hard. She had always seen herself as someone who played by the rules, who followed the system and worked her way up through hard work and determination. But now it seemed like the rules had changed, and she was being forced into a world where those rules no longer applied. "You'll have to trust me," the man continued. "You'll have to do things you never thought you'd do. But if you want to make it out of this alive, you'll need to play the game." Her stomach twisted with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. This was no longer just about protecting herself. It was about navigating a world she didn't understand. A world that would demand everything from her. And the worst part was, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The days that followed were filled with tension. She had made her decision, there was no turning back. Staying meant being involved in something she didn't fully understand, something dangerous, but leaving meant living in fear, always looking over her shoulder. The choice, though difficult, had been made. And now she had to face the consequences. Her days were no longer filled with the ordinary struggles of work, small office politics, and deadlines. Instead, they were spent learning from the man who had brought her here, trying to understand the world she had been thrust into. He had become her constant companion, silent at times, yet always present. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized that he wasn't just protecting her. He was preparing her. The first lesson came on a cool morning a few days after her decision to stay. They were sitting in the living room, a place she had come to know as her refuge, when he spoke. "It's time to start learning how to protect yourself," he said, his voice steady as usual. "You've been thrown into this world, and you need to understand that it's not about playing by the rules anymore. It's about survival." She had listened carefully, unsure of what he meant at first, but the more he spoke, the more she realized that the lessons he was offering weren't just about physical safety. They were about mental sharpness, about seeing the world not through the eyes of a regular person, but through the eyes of someone who had seen it all. The manipulations, the power struggles, the betrayals. "People will come at you from all directions," he continued. "They'll try to use you, control you, get into your head. You have to be prepared for that. You can't trust anyone completely, not even me." His words were a stark reminder of the world she had entered, the world she had been living in, where trust had once been simple was now filled with shadows. Every conversation, every glance, every gesture could mean something more than it appeared. It was a lesson she hadn't expected to learn, but one she had no choice but to absorb. The first few days of training were difficult. The man taught her how to read people's behavior, how to spot small cues that could reveal someone's true intentions. She learned how to listen, not just to the words being said, but to the silence in between, the unspoken things that people didn't want to reveal. He took her out into the city, teaching her how to move through crowds without drawing attention. "Blend in," he instructed. "The key is to never look like you're trying to be noticed. Move with purpose, but don't make it obvious." They spent hours walking the streets, practicing subtle maneuvers, blending into crowds and disappearing into alleyways when necessary. At first she felt awkward and self-conscious, but over time, she began to understand the importance of it all. She was being trained to be invisible, to avoid drawing the attention of the people who were watching her. Her nights were spent studying, learning about the business world and the intricate network of power that stretched far beyond what she had ever imagined. The man introduced her to people, some of whom were allies, others not. But each encounter was a test, a way for her to understand how to navigate this new world without falling prey to its dangers. "Never show fear," he would tell her. "Fear is a weakness, and it's something they can smell from a mile away." She quickly learned that this new world was built on perception. People acted confident even when they weren't, and they were always watching for an opportunity to gain the upper hand. It was a game of constant manipulation, and she had to become a player if she wanted to survive. But no matter how hard she tried to keep up, there was always one question that lingered in the back of her mind. Why her? Why had she been chosen? What made her so important to the people who were after her? She didn't have answers, but she knew that she was now part of something much larger than herself. And as the days went by, she started to feel a sense of responsibility. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was learning how to fight back, how to take control of her life in a way she had never imagined before. Her relationship with the man, though still guarded, began to shift. There were moments of quiet connection, brief glimpses of vulnerability that she hadn't expected. Despite his cold exterior, she saw how much he was willing to do to protect her. He had been through it all before, and he was determined not to let her fall into the same traps that had caught so many others. One afternoon, as they were sitting in the living room, going over a set of documents related to the corporate network she was now part of, she looked up at him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "Why are you helping me?" For a moment there was silence. He didn't answer right away, as if he was weighing the truth of her question. She had asked him before, but he had always avoided giving a straight answer. But this time something seemed different. He set the papers down and turned to face her. "I didn't expect to get involved in your life," he said, his voice low. "But when I saw what was happening, I couldn't just walk away. I've seen too many people fall because they didn't know how to navigate this world. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen to you." She didn't know what to say. There was a sincerity in his words that she hadn't heard before. It wasn't just about her safety. It was about ensuring that she didn't lose herself in the process of playing this dangerous game. And maybe, just maybe, there was something more to this than just survival. Perhaps there was a chance for her to change the rules, to take control in a way that hadn't been possible before. But there was still so much she didn't know. She wasn't sure if she was ready to step into this world fully, to become the kind of person who could manipulate, deceive, and control. It went against everything she had believed in, everything she had stood for. But in the end, what choice did she have? She couldn't go back to her old life. She couldn't pretend like she hadn't seen the shadows that lurked beneath the surface of the world she had known. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, she felt herself becoming more entrenched in this new reality. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to see the world with different eyes, eyes that saw opportunity in every situation, eyes that knew how to read between the lines. The man had taught her well, but the more she learned, the more she began to question whether she could ever go back to the person she had been before. The world she was now a part of was far from simple. There were no clear lines between right and wrong, no easy answers. It was a world where power was everything, and if you didn't know how to play the game, you would lose. And as she spent more time with him, she realized that there was a certain comfort in this world of complexity. It was a world where everything was on the table, where nothing was as it seemed, and where every decision could change the course of your life. But it was also a world where trust was fragile, and the stakes were high. One wrong move, one slip-up, and everything she had worked for could be taken away in an instant. She wasn't just learning to survive anymore. She was learning to fight for what she wanted. The days grew longer, and the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her more than ever. She was no longer the same person who had walked into the man's life weeks ago. The quiet woman who had been unsure of everything was now learning how to hold her own, to make decisions, and to navigate the world in a way she never thought possible. But with each new lesson, she realized that she was no longer just a passive participant in the game. She was becoming a player, and with that came new responsibilities, new dangers. She had learned how to blend in, how to read the people around her, and most importantly, how to protect herself. But the question still lingered. Why had the man decided to save her? What was his true purpose in all of this? The more she learned, the more she realized that her life wasn't just being shaped by the world around her. It was being shaped by him. He had always been there, a constant presence in her life, watching her, guiding her. But the more she saw of his world, the more she saw the cracks in his carefully controlled exterior. There were things he wasn't saying, things he wasn't revealing. The relationship between them had shifted. She had gone from being a scared, confused woman to someone who was starting to understand the rules of this dangerous world. And through it all, the man had been her protector, her mentor, but also something more. Someone she couldn't quite figure out. There were moments when she caught him watching her with a look in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. Sometimes it felt like concern, other times like something deeper, something more personal. One evening, they were sitting in the apartment, going over a set of documents related to her work. They were quiet, focused on the task at hand when she finally spoke. "I don't understand why you've been helping me," she said, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it. "Why me? Why did you save me that night?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time he didn't immediately respond. His fingers paused over the papers in front of him, and for a long moment he didn't look up. It was as though he were choosing his words carefully, weighing the truth of what he was about to say. "I didn't choose this," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "But when I saw what was happening, when I saw the danger you were in, I couldn't just stand by. I've seen too many people fall because they didn't know how to protect themselves, how to navigate the world they were in. I didn't want that for you." His words were simple, but they carried weight. He wasn't just talking about her safety. He was talking about her future. He was talking about the world she was now a part of, a world she was learning to understand. "You said you were watching me," she said, her voice softer now. "But for how long? What exactly have you been watching?" He didn't look at her when he spoke, but his answer was clear. "I've been keeping an eye on the people around you, the ones who see you as a means to an end, and I wanted to make sure you didn't fall into their hands." The realization hit her hard. She had been targeted by people who saw her as nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game, and the man had been trying to protect her from that fate. But there was more to it than that. He had been keeping track of every move she made, every decision she took. The feeling of being watched, of being controlled, was unsettling. But at the same time, she knew he was right. She had been too naive, too trusting of the people around her. She had never seen the undercurrents of power and manipulation that ran beneath the surface of the world she had been living in. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. "I didn't want to be part of this world." "I know," he replied. "But now that you're here, there's no turning back. The game is already in motion, and you have to make the choice to play it. Or get out." She swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had already made her choice to stay, to learn, to survive. But now the stakes felt higher than ever. If she didn't play the game, she would be swallowed whole. If she did, she would have to give up everything she had believed in, everything she had stood for. "Then what happens now?" she asked, her voice steady but unsure. "What's the next step?" He turned to face her then, his expression softer than it had been in days. "Now, you start taking control. You've learned the basics, but now it's time to start making decisions on your own. You have the tools, the knowledge. You just have to decide how to use them." His words were like a challenge, a test. He had taught her how to protect herself, how to navigate this dangerous world, but now it was up to her to make her own path. It wasn't enough to rely on him anymore. She had to stand on her own, to use everything she had learned to carve out a space for herself in this world that was constantly shifting beneath her feet. The next few days were a blur. She spent them in a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and quiet moments of reflection. The man was always there, guiding her when necessary, but he was no longer as present as he had been in the past. He was giving her space, forcing her to make decisions on her own, to take responsibility for the direction her life was heading. And then, it happened. The moment she had been waiting for, the moment that would define her future. It was late one night when the phone call came. She had been working, reviewing another set of documents when her phone buzzed on the table. She didn't recognize the number, but the feeling that something important was about to happen made her answer. "This is your last chance," a voice on the other end said, cold and calculating. "We know what you've been doing, and we know who you're working with. If you want to avoid being eliminated, you need to step aside. You need to leave this life behind." Her heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Who is this?" The voice didn't answer directly. "You know who we are. We know who you are. You've been marked. It's only a matter of time before we get to you." The call ended abruptly, leaving her staring at the phone in her hand, her thoughts spinning. She knew exactly who this was. It was the same group of people who had been after her since the beginning. The people who wanted control, who saw her as a tool to be used. They were making their move and they wanted her to back down. But there was no backing down now. She had learned too much, become too involved. She wasn't going to let them win, not without a fight. She stood up, her mind made up. The world she had entered was a dangerous one, filled with power plays and manipulations. But now she was ready to play. She had learned from the best, and she wasn't going to let anyone control her life anymore. She walked into the next room where the man was sitting, waiting. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He could see the determination in her eyes. "It's time," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not backing down." He stood, his gaze steady. "I knew you wouldn't." And in that moment, everything changed. She was no longer the passive observer. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was taking control of her future, and nothing, no one was going to stop her. The tension of the last few days was weighing heavily on her shoulders. She had spent weeks trying to stay a step ahead, learning to navigate the shadows of a world she never intended to be part of. But now it felt as though the walls were closing in. The people who had been tracking her were becoming more determined, and despite everything she had learned, she still couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled deeper into something bigger than she could ever fully comprehend. She had spent so much time thinking about what had happened to her, about the choices she had made, and about the man who had saved her and brought her into this dangerous game. She owed him more than she could ever express. He had given her the tools to protect herself, the knowledge to stay safe, and the courage to make decisions she never thought she'd be able to make. But even with all of that, the fear of the unknown still gripped her. The city outside her apartment felt like a foreign place now. The busy streets, the familiar faces, all of it seemed like a different world. She couldn't go back to the life she had known before. The decision to stay had changed everything. She had crossed a line and there was no turning back. It had been days since she last saw him. The man who had been her protector, her mentor, had been distant lately. He was always there, always watching, but he no longer offered the same sense of reassurance he once did. She could feel the distance between them growing, but she couldn't bring herself to ask why. Part of her was afraid that if she did, the fragile bond they had built would shatter. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from him. "Meet me tonight. I'll explain everything." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew this was a turning point. She had to face whatever was coming next. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and headed out into the night. The streets were quieter than usual, and the cold air nipped at her skin as she walked briskly toward the meeting spot. It wasn't far from her apartment, but the closer she got, the more her nerves began to get the better of her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something big, something she wasn't ready for. When she reached the cafe, he was already there, sitting at a table in the back, his face obscured by the shadows. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect, before walking over and sitting down across from him. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy, before he finally broke it. "You've done well," he said, his voice calm but steady. "Better than I thought you would." She wasn't sure if she should feel relief or unease at his words. She had come so far, learned so much, but there was still so much she didn't know, so much she hadn't been prepared for. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice quiet but determined. "Why haven't I seen you? What's going on?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The situation's changed. The people who are after you, they're more powerful than we thought. They've been watching us and they know we're moving against them. If we don't act quickly, we'll be caught in the crossfire." Her heart pounded. The words felt like a slap, and the weight of the situation finally hit her. She had been running on adrenaline for so long, learning the rules, playing the game, but now it felt like everything was spiraling out of control. The threat was no longer abstract. It was real and it was closing in. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice a little shakier than she intended. "What's the plan?" He exhaled slowly, as though gathering his thoughts. "We need to cut off their access to you. They've been using your connections to get to us. But if we eliminate those connections, they'll have nowhere to go. You need to disappear for a while, just until we can make them think they've lost." The idea of disappearing, of cutting ties with everyone and everything she knew, was both terrifying and necessary. She had worked so hard to get to where she was in life, but she understood the stakes. If she didn't do this, if she didn't act now, everything she had worked for would be at risk. And so she made the decision. It was time to play the game, even if it meant losing a part of herself in the process. "What do I need to do?" she asked, the determination in her voice unmistakable. He looked at her with a hint of approval. "First, you need to leave the city. It's too dangerous here. I've arranged a safe house for you, a place where you can lay low until we know how they plan to move against us." Her chest tightened. It was like the walls were closing in on her, and the idea of disappearing, of being hidden away, was unsettling. But she knew there was no other option. The man had always told her that to survive in this world, she needed to be willing to make sacrifices, and this was the biggest sacrifice yet. "You won't be alone," he continued, his voice steady. "I'll be with you every step of the way. But you need to trust me. This is the only way." Trust. It was something she had struggled with since this all began. Trusting him had been the hardest part, because she had never been one to rely on others. She had always been independent, always handled things on her own, but now there was no other choice. She had to trust him. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'll go." He stood up then, signaling for her to follow. "We leave tonight." The journey to the safe house was long and silent. The car moved through the dark streets and she watched the city pass by, feeling like a stranger in a place that had once been familiar. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that this decision was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that she wasn't sure she was ready for. When they arrived at the house, it was far from what she expected. It wasn't an extravagant mansion or a flashy penthouse. It was a simple, secluded cabin tucked away in the woods. There was no sign of life around it, no indication that anyone had been there for a long time. It was the perfect hiding spot. He showed her around the small house, pointing out the basics: where to find food, how to lock the doors, how to keep her movements minimal. Every detail felt critical, every action had weight. "Stay here until I tell you otherwise," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I'll be back soon. We have work to do." As he left, she sat down on the small couch, the silence of the cabin pressing in on her. She had done everything she could to prepare for this moment. Now, all she could do was wait. The next few days were the hardest. She kept herself busy, going through the small stack of documents the man had left behind. They weren't just random papers. They were notes, maps, plans. It was clear that everything was interconnected, and the more she read, the more she realized how deep the web was. There were people involved, people she never imagined would be a part of this world. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of isolation began to take its toll. She couldn't help but feel the loss of everything she had known. The world she had left behind felt so distant now, like it belonged to someone else, and the longer she stayed hidden, the more she began to wonder if she would ever be able to return to it. One evening, as she was finishing a meal alone, she heard a car pull up outside. Her heart jumped. It was him. He walked in, looking as calm and composed as ever. But there was something different about him now. There was a certain finality in the way he moved, a sense that things were coming to a head. "We're ready," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "It's time to end this." She stood up, her heart racing. The end was near. She had learned everything she could, and now it was time to face whatever was coming next. There was no turning back, and with that, she knew the next phase of the game was about to begin.